My name is Kendra Miles, and I can tell you the exact second my family decided I wasn't worth standing beside. It was supposed to be a simple anniversary dinner for my parents on a Denver rooftop, a night of polite laughter and clinking glasses when my sister suddenly pushed her chair back like she owned the room. She didn't raise a toast. She raised a knife. Her eyes locked on me and she said loud enough for every relative to hear, "It's embarrassing to share a last name with you." The table went silent for half a heartbeat before the real blow landed. My mom nodded as if my sister had finally said something honest. My dad actually clapped slow, satisfied, almost relieved, like he'd been waiting years for someone to announce it out loud. I didn't argue. I didn't even look away. I just sat there letting their faces blur together as my sister kept talking, piling on every petty insult she could sharpen, feeding off the attention, like she'd rehearsed the entire speech in front of a mirror. That room wasn't large, but somehow every stare in it felt like a spotlight pinned on my chest, trapping me in place, while she tore me apart with a smile. And then, everything shifted. A single chair scraped against the floor. My grandmother, quiet, steady, the one person no one expected to move, stood up. She looked at my sister, then at me, and spoke exactly 6 words. 6 words that sliced the entire night open and changed the direction of my life before I even understood what was happening. If you've ever had your own family turn on you like a crowd hungry for a show, hit the like button so I know I'm not alone, because what happened after those 6 words is something none of them were prepared for. Years before that rooftop night, the pattern had already been carved into me. Growing up, my sister Aubrey Miles moved through our house like someone born under a spotlight, and my parents treated her as if the world existed to clap for her. Every season brought a new activity for her: dance one year, voice lessons the next, and a string of birthday parties so extravagant the neighborhood kids talked about them for weeks. She'd twirl in sparkly costumes while my mom recorded every second, reminding everyone how Aubrey just has that special shine. I didn't have a shine, at least not the kind they cared about. I loved books, puzzles, and figuring out how things worked. When I begged to join the after-school robotics club, my dad said it would be too much driving. But he never missed a single dance rehearsal of Aubrey's, even the optional ones. The message never came out loud, but it didn't have to. Her interests mattered. Mine were an inconvenience. Aubrey didn't hide behind false humility either. Anytime I tried something new, she found a way to turn it into a joke. When I won a small science fair in 5th grade, she shrugged and said it didn't really count because only 5 people competed. My parents didn't correct her. My mom ruffled her hair. My dad chuckled, and all I got was a distracted, "Well, good job, I guess," before they rushed out the door to take Aubrey to her celebratory dinner for finishing second in a school talent show. I learned early not to expect applause. Even simple things showed the imbalance. If Aubrey forgot homework, my mom wrote notes to excuse her. If I forgot mine, I was lectured about responsibility. If Aubrey snapped at me, my dad said she was just stressed. If I pushed back, I was told to be the mature one. The rules were flexible for her and carved in stone for me. But the strange thing was that I wouldn't have survived those years without one person. My grandmother Lorraine Miles noticed everything without needing to be told. She was never dramatic, never confrontational, but she had this way of pulling me aside when the house felt too small and saying things that made the air easier to breathe. The first time she told me I was smart, it wasn't the hollow kind parents throw around. It was steady, grounded, almost factual. "You've got a mind that sees past the obvious," she said once while I worked on a puzzle at her kitchen table. On another afternoon, after watching Aubrey get praised for something I had quietly done earlier, she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and spoke words that stayed with me long after childhood ended. "You've got a mind and a heart they don't know how to value yet." She didn't promise things would change. She didn't pretend the house was fair. She just saw me fully, clearly, without comparison, and in a family that acted like I blended into the walls, being seen was a kind of lifeline. By the time I reached my 20s, everything between us had shifted into something sharper. When I moved to Houston after college, I didn't expect much from anyone. I just wanted a life built by my own hands. I found a job as a junior financial analyst at a mid-size firm, the kind of place where no one cared about your last name, only whether you could make the numbers speak. The work was demanding, but I liked knowing that every paycheck came from effort no one could take credit for, but me. I lived alone in a small apartment, managed my own bills, cooked my own meals, and never once bragged about the promotions I earned. Independence wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Aubrey, meanwhile, slid directly into the family business as if it had been waiting untouched for her arrival. Miles' wellness group created a brand new marketing position the same month she graduated, and she stepped into it with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Overnight, she became the face of the company. Splashy headshots on the website, magazine-style features on their social pages, videos of her giving tours of new clinics, even though she barely understood the operational side. My parents talked about her work as if she had founded the entire chain. Every phone call home turned into a monologue about her leadership, her vision, her impact. When I mentioned anything happening in Houston, the conversation shifted back to her before I finished half a sentence. It wasn't jealousy. I genuinely didn't care about being praised. What exhausted me was the constant reminder that in my parents' eyes, adulthood hadn't made us equals. I had measurable achievements, complex accounts handled, teams led, budgets balanced, but none of it seemed to register. Instead, I got the same line every time we spoke. "So when are you coming back to help the family?" The way they said it, you'd think I had abandoned some sacred duty. They insisted that my skills were being wasted in Houston, as if any job outside their orbit was a temporary mistake I'd eventually correct. Aubrey didn't help. She played into the narrative perfectly, dropping casual comments about how the family needs someone reliable while hinting that I lacked the qualities necessary for real responsibility. She'd never done my job, never worked outside the safety net of our parents. Yet she talked as if she were mentoring me instead of the other way around. Two paths emerged without anyone saying it out loud. Mine was built from quiet consistency and long nights at the office. Hers floated on praise delivered before she proved anything. Those differences should have made us stronger in different ways, but they only sharpened the contrast between us. And with every holiday visit, every strained dinner, every forced smile across the table, the gap widened until it stopped feeling like a gap and started feeling like a warning. In the days leading up to the anniversary party, the air around my family shifted in a way I couldn't quite name. It started when Aubrey posted a glossy photo of herself on the balcony of the main clinic, chin lifted like she was posing for a magazine cover. The caption was short and loud at the same time, future CEO loading with a little sparkle emoji at the end. Within minutes, the comments filled with relatives cheering her on as if she had already been handed the position. My parents reposted it to their own pages, adding lines about how proud they were of her leadership, even though her job mostly involved overseeing holiday campaigns and picking color palettes for wellness ads. I scrolled past it without reacting, but something about the timing made my stomach knot. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. It wasn't the usual guilt trip. It was weirder, heavier. "Just be on your best behavior this weekend," she wrote, as if I were a child who needed coaching before a school recital. Before I could respond, my dad texted a separate message. "A lot is happening right now. Don't make things harder." Harder for whom I stared at the screen, feeling a familiar mix of irritation and concern twist through me. They never spoke that way unless something big was brewing, and they never warned me about anything unless they were scared I'd disrupt the carefully curated image they wanted to project. Later that night, while I was finishing a report in my apartment, my phone lit up with a call from my cousin. It was the first time in this story a cousin appeared, so I'll say her name properly, Emily Turner. Emily never called without a reason. The second I picked up, I could hear the tension in her voice. "Kendra, listen," she said, lowering her volume like someone might overhear her. "I don't know what's going on, but Grandma's been meeting with her lawyer a lot lately. More than usual." I sat up straighter. "How many times?" she exhaled sharply. "I don't know the exact number, but more than I've ever seen. I stopped by her house yesterday, and there were sealed envelopes from the firm on the table. Thick ones." I didn't speak right away. Grandma never handled legal paperwork lightly. Everything she did was intentional, methodical, and tied to long-term consequences. If she was revisiting documents this close to the anniversary party, something significant was moving behind the scenes. "Do my parents know?" I asked. "They act like they do," Emily whispered, "but they won't talk about it." And when I asked Grandma, she changed the subject so fast it scared me. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the unfinished spreadsheet glowing on my laptop. For the first time in years, the dynamic within our family felt unstable, like plates shifting under a house that had always stood on the same foundation. Whatever was coming, it wasn't small. And even though I didn't know what role I played in any of it, I could feel the weight of something gathering just beyond my view. When the anniversary party finally began, the tension I'd been sensing all week settled over everything like an invisible film. The moment I stepped into the dining hall, the first thing I saw was a cluster of relatives surrounding Aubrey as if she were the guest of honor rather than our parents. She stood in the center, animated and polished, recounting some marketing pitch she had given at work. Every time she lifted her hand or flipped her hair, the group reacted as though they were witnessing a historic moment. I walked past them quietly, but even from a distance I heard comments like, "She was born for leadership," and "No wonder your parents are so proud." Not one person noticed I'd arrived. And honestly, I expected that. What I didn't expect was how aggressive the spotlight stealing would become as the night went on. Each time I joined a conversation, any conversation, Aubrey found a way to insert herself within seconds. If I answered a question about Houston, she'd swoop in with a louder story about a wellness brand partnership she was negotiating. If someone complimented me on the small gift I brought, she'd talk over it by announcing plans for a rebranding campaign at the company. She wasn't even subtle. She operated like someone convinced that any attention landing on me was attention stolen from her. My parents didn't just tolerate it, they fueled it. My dad kept steering guests toward her, saying things like, "Have you heard what Aubrey is working on? It's groundbreaking." My mom trailed close behind him, chiming in with, "She's the visionary of the family," as if I were invisible in the same room. At one point, I was speaking to an uncle about a project I'd recently completed in Houston, a complex financial restructuring his own colleague had asked me about before, when Aubrey cut through the group, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "Uncle Don, wait until you hear the numbers I pulled for our new expansion." It was so calculated, so pointed, that even he paused mid-sentence, torn between politeness and confusion. The conversation simply shifted away from me as if I'd never opened my mouth. I felt the familiar burn of irritation low in my chest, but I stayed calm, letting the waves of noise and praise roll past me. The room wasn't loud, but it felt suffocating. Every compliment directed at her landed with the weight of a comparison no one needed to say out loud. Every time my parents looked at her, their faces softened with the same pride they'd withheld from me for decades. Yet the worst moments weren't the loud ones. They were the quiet, surgical comments delivered with a smile. When I stood near the dessert table, Aubrey leaned close enough for only me to hear and said, "Don't take it personally, sis. Some people just aren't built for the spotlight." It wasn't the words, it was the tone, coated in sweetness, but sharp enough to draw blood. I didn't respond. There was no point. But the pressure inside me kept building, tightening with each passing minute. And while no one else seemed aware of it, the night was already tipping towards something none of us would be able to undo. The shift happened so fast it barely felt real. One moment the room buzzed with polite conversation, and the next Aubrey stood at the center table with a glass raised high, wearing that confident smile she saved for moments when she wanted the whole world to watch her. She tapped her spoon against the rim, making a bright, sharp sound that cut through the noise. "Since we're all here," she announced, her eyes sweeping the room, "I just want to say something about my sister. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't need any. It's honestly embarrassing to share a last name with someone who brings nothing to this family." The words landed with a force that sucked the air out of my chest. I didn't move. I didn't blink. For a few seconds, all I could do was stand there, rooted to the floor, as if my body refused to process what had just happened. Conversations died instantly. Silverware froze halfway to plates. A few guests stared at their napkins, unwilling to look at me or her. And then, from the head of the table, a single deliberate sound broke the stillness, a soft, measured tap of glass. Grandma Lorraine had lifted her water goblet and tapped it once more, commanding the room without raising her voice. Every head turned toward her. She pushed herself upright, steady and unshaken, her gaze moving from Aubrey to me, before settling back on Aubrey, with a clarity that made my skin prickle. When she spoke, it was in the calmest tone I'd ever heard from her, and yet it sliced through the room like lightning. "If she embarrasses you, leave now." 6 words. They hit harder than anything Aubrey had said. My sister's smirk faltered, the confidence drained from her expression like color from wet paint. My parents stiffened, glancing at each other with an unease I had never seen in them, but Grandma wasn't finished. She reached into her bag and unfolded a thick envelope with a gold seal, placing it carefully on the table. "Since we're sharing truths tonight," she said, "I think it's time everyone knows mine." The lawyer's name embossed on the documents was unmistakable. She opened the envelope and slid out a stack of signed pages I immediately recognized as legal filings. "These are the finalized amendments to my estate plan," she continued. The room collectively inhaled. "Effective immediately, all controlling shares of Miles Wellness Group, along with the properties attached to it, are transferred to my granddaughter Kendra." My ears rang. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Gasps burst around the room. A few relatives leaned forward, eyes wide as if seeing me for the first time. Grandma pressed on without hesitation. "Aubrey receives a ceremonial non-voting interest. Your father and mother," she added, glancing briefly toward them, "are removed from the board and relieved of all decision-making authority." Aubrey's face twisted, confusion blending with outrage. "Grandma, you can't be serious," she whispered, voice trembling. My mom stood abruptly, knocking her chair backward. My dad's jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. But Grandma remained unmoved. "I am completely serious," she said. "And everything is already filed." Silence swallowed the room. Not anger, not shouting. Just the unmistakable realization that the ground beneath our family had shifted permanently, and there was no undoing it. In the weeks that followed, the fallout unfolded with a clarity no one in my family could ignore. The morning after the party, Miles Wellness Group initiated the formal transition outlined in the filings, and the first action taken by the board under my authority was a comprehensive restructuring review. Aubrey was asked to step away from her role not out of spite, but because her position had been created without qualifications to support it. The HR department delivered the decision in writing, citing performance metrics and the absence of any documented achievements that justified her title. She left the building that same afternoon, red-eyed and furious, but the company moved on without a ripple. My parents faced a different kind of reckoning. The revised estate plan triggered immediate tax obligations they had never prepared for. When the accountants completed the calculations, the amount owed was far beyond anything they could cover with savings. Within a month, the house they had lived in for over 20 years went on the market. They also refinanced their lake property in desperation, but even that wasn't enough to stabilize the losses. Every financial cushion they thought they could rely on vanished under the weight of consequences they had never seen coming. Meanwhile, I stepped into the leadership role Grandma had entrusted to me. The transition wasn't dramatic. It was steady procedural and grounded in the kind of discipline I had built my career on. Departments that had been disorganized became structured. Projects stuck in limbo finally moved. Employees who had felt ignored or overshadowed found space to contribute. I didn't walk in with fireworks or speeches. I walked in with a plan. And within a few weeks, even people who barely knew me began to acknowledge that the company functioned better with someone who valued the work more than the spotlight. Word spread through the extended family quickly, each relative adding their own interpretation. Some claimed they had always known I was the responsible one. Others whispered about the shock of the announcement, trying to piece together how everything had shifted so drastically. But none of them reached out to ask how I was handling it. They only wanted the story, not the truth. I refused to fuel the gossip. I didn't explain myself. I didn't comment on the estate, the company, or my parents' situation. When messages came in sympathetic, curious, accusatory, I let them sit unread. Silence became its own boundary. As for my relationship with my parents and Aubrey, it didn't fade. It fractured cleanly. There were no apologies, no attempts to fix anything, no late-night conversations trying to mend the damage. Just distance, real, measurable, permanent distance. And surprisingly, that distance brought an unfamiliar kind of calm. I wasn't celebrating anyone's misfortune, but I wasn't carrying their expectations anymore. Each of us had stepped into the future created by that night, shaped not by anger but by consequence. For the first time in my life, the path ahead belonged entirely to me. Life settled into a quieter rhythm once the dust finally stopped moving. Not long after everything changed, Grandma Lorraine decided she wanted to leave Denver behind and come live with me in Austin. She arrived with 2 suitcases, a stack of crossword books, and the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly where she wanted her final years to be spent. Sharing a home with her didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like the first time in my adult life that I had family under my roof who wasn't draining the air out of the room. Evenings became something I looked forward to: simple dinners, quiet laughter, long conversations where she asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers. She never brought up the inheritance, the company, or the chaos that had torn through the family. She chose gentleness over rehashing pain, and in doing so, she gave me space to breathe. As for my parents and Aubrey, I blocked every number, muted every email, and removed every avenue they could use to reach me. It wasn't dramatic, it was deliberate. Boundaries weren't punishment, they were protection. Each day that passed without their voices in my ear felt like a layer of heaviness lifting. I realized how much of my life had been shaped around shrinking myself so they wouldn't feel threatened, and how exhausting that pattern had been. With them gone from my daily world, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Healing wasn't cinematic. It was a slow reconstruction of routines and self-worth. Therapy helped me understand that distance wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. Leading the company taught me that competence doesn't need applause to be real. And living with Grandma reminded me that family isn't defined by biology. It's defined by who shows up with kindness when no one else does. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if my parents regretted their choices, if Aubrey ever understood the role she played in what happened, but I didn't linger on those thoughts. Regret belongs to those who caused the damage, not the one who walked away from it. My focus stayed on the future, on work, on friendships I had neglected, on mornings that didn't feel heavy anymore. One evening, Grandma sat beside me on the porch and said almost casually, "Peace looks good on you." And in that moment, I knew she was right. The life I was building wasn't loud or flashy, but it was honest. It was mine. The lesson I carried forward was simple: blood may tie people together, but respect is what keeps them close. And when respect is gone, distance is not a failure, it's freedom. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. And for the first time in years, I wasn't surviving my family. I was living my life.